Okay, so my name is Anna Luking, and I'm a student studying microbiology here at NC State, but I'm also doing a minor in piano performance. So I thought that I would talk a little bit about how biology and music intersect and overlap a little bit. So with that, we can talk a bit about sensory motor integration. So that seems like a very intimidating term, but I promise it's a very easy concept to digest and understand. So it's essentially the relationship between motor and auditory processing in the brain of a musician. So what does that mean? What is motor slash auditory processing? So it's essentially how our brain makes sense of what we hear, so auditory, but it's also how our brain prepares us to um, to complete certain tasks, be it picking up the smug or playing a piece on the piano. It's how our brain prepares to send those signals out to our fingers to complete the tasks. So there are a few parts of the brain that are really important in these processes. So there's the premotor cortex, or the PM, and also the supplementary motor area, or SMA. And so these are involved in the preparation to move, as I mentioned earlier, but also the SMA is really involved with the completion of sequence activities. So we can see this in piano, it's very sequenced, and muscle memory. And then there's also the auditory cortex, or the AC, which processes sound waves so our brain can understand them. There's also the planum temporal, or the PT, which is involved with more complex sounds like harmonies, etc. So, what does this have to do with being a musician? So, the parts of the brain responsible for movement and those responsible for sound work together when we play music. And they're even working together when we're thinking about playing or listening to someone play. And so we know this because studies have been done in which participants perform tasks such as listening to music without movement and moving as if they were playing a piece on the piano without auditory feedback. So by scanning the neural activity of these people using an fMRI, we were able to see what parts of the brain lit up, meaning that they were active. So the collected data showed that non-trained musicians did not have this joint activation between the auditory and motor cortexes like trained musicians do. So what does that mean? So I kind of circled a few things here, but I'll erase it just so we can start over. So first of all, like I mentioned earlier, trained musicians have this a lot more than non-musicians do. I'm just getting my pen. And so here we see this data there. But also, when we listen to something without movement, we see that yes, the auditory cortex is lit up, but there's also a little bit of activation in the supplementary motor area. So that's significant because it tells us that as musicians, when we're listening to a piece, our brain is preparing us to move. Um, and so also, we see that when we play without feedback, and this is a really cool one because it scientifically proves the inner ear and shows us visually what that looks like. So when we play something, if I were to sit down and look at a sheet of music and try to play that without getting auditory feedback, this is what my brain would look like. So obviously I have activation in the premotor cortex because my body is moving, and so it needs that to prepare to move. But also you see activation in the auditory cortex, meaning that I'm hearing something. I can imagine what my movements would sound like on the keyboard. And so that shows us that and establishes that there really is a connection between these two parts of our brain and that there's an overlap between them. So this is really important when we talk about practicing piano. And when you're learning a new skill and you want to be a trained musician, that's why we see this connection a lot more in trained musicians than non-trained. When you learn how to ride a bike or you learn how to do something new, you're establishing neural pathways in our brain. And so it's the same thing with learning how to play music, or even if you are a trained musician, learning a new song. Um, when we do repetition, we strengthen those neural pathways, and through the same philosophy, we can strengthen the connection between our motor cortex and our auditory cortex and the relationship that those two have. Therefore, improving our inner ear and making it that much more efficient to learn how to play a piece more effectively. All right, that is all I have. Thank you.